I am who I am because it's been like Yun Chun-Li, grandfather, one in a billion ancestor. I need to define my space, define my face in this ancestral embrace that is skin tight, but my skin fits me just right. They're all there, my ancestral throne, for I am, we are, lifetimes infinite, billion strong.
Hi everyone, welcome to Mind Your Margins, a podcast that seeks to foster a space where it's humanly possible to make humanity possible. My name is Michelle Myers, and I'll be trying my best to help us navigate through topics about marginalized identities and prioritizing the perspectives of people who may feel invisible or silenced or ignored or erased. Also, I want to acknowledge that these discussions are difficult, but I'm hoping that through these conversations, we can claim space for understanding and compassion. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I know that it's been a couple of months since the last episode, but as much as I try, once I start teaching for the semester, it's very difficult for me to find extra time to plan and record these episodes. And whatever free time I do have, I've been devoting to finalizing my middle grade novel, which is titled Talk Me a Story About Moon Rabbit. And I'm hoping that the novel will be published by fall of 2026. And of course, I know that you all lead busy lives too, so I'm just deeply grateful to you for taking the time to listen to this episode. But before I get into today's topic, as I do at the beginning of every episode, I'm going to share a land acknowledgement statement. I call out to the ancestors of the native peoples of this land in the hopes that by honoring them, I also honor my mother and my father, who are now ancestors, and through them, connect to my Korean ancestors and the land of my birth. I hope that you will reflect on the words as I speak them. I acknowledge that the land on which I live and work are the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Delaware continue to this day. I recognize that the place where I recorded this podcast also sits on the unceded homeland of the Lenape people. I and my listeners take this opportunity to honor the original caretakers of this land and recognize the histories of land theft, violence, erasure, and oppression that has brought ourselves here. We are grateful to be guests in these lands and commit to solidarity in the struggle for Indigenous sovereignty. This land acknowledgement does not correct the wrongs committed against the Lenape or any of the other First Nation peoples across this continent, but through it, I hope to remind myself and my listeners of our connections and indebtedness to the Indigenous people of this land, and particularly of New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Saying their names and learning their histories call them into our consciousness and awareness. Thank you for listening to that land acknowledgement statement. And during the time that I'm writing and recording this episode here in the United States, we recognized Indigenous Peoples Day a few weeks ago on October 13th, and we're approaching Native American Heritage Month in November. I hope that anyone listening who resides in the United States takes some time to reflect on the misinformation that we've been taught since elementary school, whether taught to us knowingly or unknowingly, about the relationship between the First Nation peoples known as the Wampanoags and the Puritans, who we call the Pilgrims. And in order to have a more accurate view of the painful history of betrayal and warfare and genocide that was enacted against Indigenous peoples in North America to establish the English colonies that eventually led to the process of nation building that became the founding of the United States, each of us should take on the personal responsibility of learning this history from the perspective of Indigenous peoples. And I want to let you know that a link will be available on the episode page to an article written by historian Philip Deloria, which is titled The Myth of Thanksgiving, and it was first published in The New Yorker on November 25th, 2019. And in this article, Deloria reviews a book which was published on November 5th, 2019, and was written by another historian named David Silverman, and that book is titled This Land is Their Land, The Wampanoag Indians, Plymouth Colony, and the Troubled History of Thanksgiving. There will also be a link to that as well. And Deloria's article and Silverman's book deconstruct the disinformation around the mythologizing of Thanksgiving and the false narratives that get taught as history. They also shift the perspective so that the Wampanoag people's experiences and voices are at the center rather than pushed to the margins. And I feel very strongly that it's only by learning about historical events through multiple perspectives that we can piece together a fuller and more accurate understanding of what actually occurred and the enduring impact that it has had on many different people, not just glorifying the colonizers in the name of some blind, misguided sense of American patriotism. So please keep this in mind as we approach Thanksgiving and the end of year holiday season in general. And I'm not saying don't enjoy the time with your family or that you shouldn't celebrate Thanksgiving and the holidays. If it's important to you, as it is to me, to celebrate Thanksgiving and spend time with family, that's fine, that's wonderful. But what I'm trying to encourage is an understanding of the importance of making a conscious choice to know more, to not allow ourselves to be miseducated and deceived, and to being open to wanting to learn more, even if it challenges our own preconceived notions. And this openness is something we should all strive for as a form of resistance against being manipulated and controlled. For example, to be aware of how Thanksgiving has been mythologized or represented in a very particular way that's deliberately designed to condition us. I mean, it's important to realize that this image that we have of this fairy tale of a shared dinner between the quote-unquote pilgrims and Native Americans was fabricated. That never happened. I mean, Thanksgiving wasn't even actually given the status of a national holiday until 1863, when Abraham Lincoln tried to use this quote-unquote holiday to unify the country during the Civil War. And if you've never heard that the Thanksgiving holiday was invented by Abraham Lincoln in 1863 as a day of unity to counter the trauma of the Civil War, then I hope you will read Deloria's article, which is not a long read, though I want to issue a trigger warning that he does include references to some brutal and graphic acts of violence that the English settlers inflicted on the Wampanoag peoples. I also hope you read Silverman's book if you ever get the chance. I just hope these texts will encourage and inspire you to begin considering the ways in which Native Americans have been misrepresented or blatantly erased within American history, starting with the myth of the first Thanksgiving. And again, links to these texts will be available on the episode description page. So whenever you're listening to this, I hope that everyone has or had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and that we feel grateful for our family and loved ones. But I also hope that we can be aware that for many Indigenous peoples in the United States, Thanksgiving is a day of mourning for their ancestors who were killed by these colonialist invaders. And I hope that we each can find time on this day to pay our respects to the First Nation peoples whose history, experiences, and perspectives have been silenced for far too long. So at the end of the last episode, which was episode 9, titled Who Gets to Learn? Insights on Trump's Anti-Education Agenda, I had stated that in episode 10, which is this episode, that I would discuss my opinions about best practices for creating a supportive classroom environment, one where teachers are allies and co-creators with our students and helping them achieve their own vision of educational success. And I had envisioned that this topic would be a continuation of the points I raised about Trump's funding cuts, not only to higher education, but also to various K through 12 programs. But I'm going to come back to that topic another time, because since recording that episode, a couple of things have happened which got me thinking about processes of knowledge acquisition outside of education institutions. In other words, outside of school, right? So how are most people learning outside of school? And what are most people learning? And the answer to that, I think, is pretty obvious. Most people are learning through social media. And there are positive and negative aspects to that, right? As one positive, social media has democratized the dissemination of information. Anyone can get on TikTok and quote unquote teach now. But on the other hand, of course, there's a great deal of fraudulent information being proliferated, which is going unchecked and unvetted. So what are the consequences of that? Particularly when the sharing of false information is incentivized through likes, shares, followers, and ultimately money. Where people are willing to post anything in order to gain attention for their content. And there are a couple of reasons why I've been thinking about this and wanted to talk about it. So after posting episode 9 of Mind Your Margins, I almost immediately felt this overwhelming sense of regret about using Trump's name in the title. Because I was concerned that people would think it was clickbait, like that the only reason why I put Trump's name in the title was to arouse a certain reaction and try to get people to listen. And I really started to agonize about it. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm somewhat anti-social media. I don't post that much. I don't scroll that much. I value my privacy. I'm not interested in the algorithm stuff. Like, I have no idea how many people are listening to this podcast. I don't ask Myung those questions. For all I know, I could just be talking to myself when I record these episodes. But I became really anxious after posting on social media that episode 9 was available and that people, like I said, would think that I was using Trump's name as clickbait. And I kept texting Myung asking if she thought it was a mistake, although I didn't really tell her exactly what I was anxious about. And she was like, I don't see why it would be a problem. So I tried to let it go, but I still worried about it. Then the shooting and killing of Charlie Kirk happened. And I want to be clear, this episode is not about Charlie Kirk. I'm just providing context for why I wanted to discuss this topic. And for me, in the aftermath of his death, I found it concerning to see all of the ways that the tragedy of the situation became exploited as content by people who claim to idolize him, people who claim to love him, and people who claim to hate him. I mean, within minutes after the shooting, graphic videos of him being shot were posted and went viral, almost immediately followed by Elon Musk posting, quote, "The left are murderers," end quote. And then all kinds of blame, finger-pointing, trolling, shitposting, and straight-up disinformation and revisionist narratives dominated social media. For me, it became a pretty shameful spectacle, and the process by which that all happened and the ramifications of all that, how it's reverberated through our society and our culture, has exposed even further the vastly different ways in which we consume and produce information which lead to the processes by which we gain knowledge. And the consequences of all that is that American society is so divisive and people truly perceive and live in the world through completely opposite realities. So because I've been reflecting on it now for weeks and just need to get it out of my head, in today's episode, I want to explore this idea of choosing to be conscious and aware, choosing to educate ourselves, choosing to not allow ourselves to be miseducated or misdirected or manipulated. And I do mean to talk about this as a real process or force that we are combating every day, because it is a struggle. This is not just some philosophical concept. We are caught up in various societal structures and processes which seek to make it more attractive to us to stay misinformed because of certain people, certain authorities, organizations, or corporations can get us to believe the disinformation they're disseminating to us, then we will keep ourselves shackled to these false beliefs. Some of us will even fight to defend these beliefs, may even go so far to kill other people over these false beliefs. And tragically, we see this happening throughout America and the world right now. We saw it happen with Charlie Kirk as an influencer, both before his death and after. We see it happening in Congress. We see it happening in Gaza. We see it happening within our own schools. It's so clear how much of a struggle it is to choose knowledge over ignorance each day. It can be emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausting, and it's no wonder that people shut down or shut off, that they take this option of an ignorance is bliss approach and allow themselves to be distracted watching entertaining, funny animal videos on TikTok all day. And I'm going to be honest, I have those moments too. Sometimes we need them. But the other important realization I've come to is that staying ignorant or shutting down or distancing myself doesn't stop these destructive forces from happening. So how can we become more aware of the way in which we receive information and gain knowledge through social media or other media outlets so that we aren't just reacting, but are instead saying, and taking the time to think about it so that we can be more intentional about responding or even deciding if we want to engage or not at all. So to get us thinking about all that, what I want to do first is unpack the way information is presented to us with the intent to manipulate us. And I like to do that by talking about the allegory of Plato's cave. And I was reminded about Plato's cave a few weeks ago after listening to Jon Stewart's The Weekly Show podcast on YouTube, where he was interviewing journalist Charlie Warzel from The Atlantic, who specializes in covering technology and social media. And Jon Stewart had him on his podcast after Charlie Kirk's death because Warzel had written an article about how social media exacerbates crisis events as they unfold. And that podcast episode is titled How Social Media Exacerbates Disaster and Disinformation. And there will be a link to the video of Jon Stewart's Weekly Show podcast to this episode on the Mind Your Margins episode page. So as I was listening to their discussion, I found myself reflecting a lot about perception versus reality and misinformation as a diversion from the truth, and how that potentially impacts me by keeping me in like a hall of mirrors where I have to find the reality among all of these illusions, and being aware of how such illusions can control my choices because I have a false perception of reality. And then something just clicked and I was like, oh, this is like Plato's cave. And it just kind of opened up a wellspring of ideas around perception and the mechanisms around disinformation and how these are used in very deliberate ways in order to control us and shape reality. So if you've never heard of Plato's cave, I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. It's an allegory, and it functions as a philosophical thought experiment. And it was introduced by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work, The Republic. And Plato used this allegory of the cave to explain his ideas about knowledge and about how people acquire knowledge and how our interpretation of the information becomes distorted through our very limited human perception. And all of that affects how we view reality and respond to it. But before I really get into this, I just want to say that if you have trouble envisioning in your mind what I'm describing, there are plenty of illustrations that you can find online depicting Plato's cave if you need an actual visual image to look at. So, imagine a cave where people have been chained since birth, sitting with their backs to a wall, and they can only see the wall in front of them. Behind them, hidden people hold objects in front of a fire, and these objects are casting shadow puppets on the wall. And these prisoners see only these shadows. They can't turn their heads to see the puppeteers or the fire. So to them, these shadows are the only reality they've ever known. They give names to the shadows, they give meaning to the shadows, and they believe that they're real. And since these people have been chained up since birth, they don't see themselves as prisoners. They think the cave and being in chains are normal because they don't know any other experience. Then one day, one of the prisoners breaks free. This prisoner sees the puppeteers, the fire, the shadow puppets, and they're confused. They want to deny what they see because it contradicts the only reality they've ever known. But they can't unsee it, right? So they continue looking for answers. Eventually, this unchained person finds their way out of the cave and escapes into the outside world, which in Plato's scenario essentially is the real world. The sunlight blinds them at first, but then their eyes adjust and they see true reality. And they realize the shadows were lies and that their entire perception was constructed to control and trap them. So then this person says to themselves, I have to go tell everybody else so that we all can be free. But when they return to the cave to free the others, the darkness blinds them again, and the other prisoners interpret this as proof that the outside world will harm them. So they threaten to kill the person trying to free them, and they choose to stay shackled in the comfort of their illusion. And that's Plato's allegory of the cave. The prisoners represent most people who live in ignorance and perceive only a limited and distorted version of reality, orchestrated by puppeteers whose main goal is to keep them trapped. And the shadows on the cave wall symbolize how information about our world is projected to us by others who wish to control our perception, creating a false version of reality. And sadly, many of us not only fall for the lies, but become so brainwashed that we react violently against actual reality or truth because we perceive these as posing such a deep existential threat to how we see ourselves and the world around us. Now, Plato's cave is useful to a point, but he was philosophizing in ancient Greece, right? So he couldn't have fathomed the technology we have today and how expertly we cast shadows now. There's no way he could have envisioned the internet or social media. So we have to reconceptualize his allegory as others have done, like the Wachowskis did for The Matrix and Hugh Howey did for his Silo book series that's now a TV series. So when I think about Plato's cave in today's context, I see how the quote-unquote shadow puppets have evolved. They're not on a cave wall. They're on our phone screens, our feeds, our timelines, our For You pages. The fire is the algorithm. The puppeteers are politicians, corporations, and interest groups that manipulate what we see, what we don't see, and what we think is real. Social media, in particular, has become the cave for so many of us. We scroll through endless images and videos, each one reflecting not reality itself, but a distorted projection of it, a shadow someone wants us to believe. And the more we engage, the better the system becomes at tailoring shadows specifically for us. It learns what we find entertaining and what we spend money on, and also what our fears, triggers, and desires are. It gives us just enough of what we already believe to keep us comfortable, and just enough entertainment and outrage to keep us hooked. So it's not about keeping us informed, it's about keeping us engaged, because engagement means profit. But in the process, we become easier to predict, easier to manipulate, and therefore ultimately easier to control. And this control becomes especially dangerous in moments of disaster and chaos. When there's a crisis, whether it's a natural disaster, a school shooting, a war, or some political upheaval, social media floods with images and videos and breaking news posts, all competing for our attention. In those moments when our emotions are heightened and our sense of security is shaken, that's when we're at our most vulnerable. That's when disinformation spreads the fastest, because fear overrides our critical thinking. And the shadow puppeteers are working overtime, creating false narratives, which take seed and then they become amplified, sometimes by bots, sometimes by bad actors, sometimes by well-meaning people who are just reacting emotionally and sharing without verifying. And the goal isn't always to convince us of one specific lie. Often it's simply to confuse us, to make us doubt everything, even our own ability to discern what's real. And then we doom scroll, right? We convince ourselves we're trying to figure out the truth when we're actually looking for posts that confirm the biases that we already have. And in this weekly show with Jon Stewart podcast that I had mentioned earlier, journalist Charlie Warzel emphasized how when tragic or shocking events happen, especially those that involve violent acts, there is typically a gap in verified, trustworthy information. And the internet and social media platforms are very good at filling that vacuum, often with speculation, with accusation, and of course with rage. These sensationalized narratives get constructed quickly with little evidence because verifying facts is bypassed in favor of speed, reactions, and shareability. So, quote-unquote free speech on social media is transformed. Rather than measured, thoughtful communication, it becomes shaped by feedback loops, pushed by the algorithms which reward outrage, blaming, and fear-mongering. And it's no accident that viral posts and headlines around tragedies use language that's engineered for maximum response, especially to heighten rage and panic. And this type of engineering isn't hypothetical. It's been happening. We know this. We know, for example, that data from companies like Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube have shown how easily people can be pushed toward increasingly extreme content through the algorithms. We know that bot accounts and troll farms have been used to influence public opinion during elections and social uprisings, not just here in the United States, but globally. So this isn't just about random people on the internet spreading rumors. These are deliberate strategies. We now know that firms like Cambridge Analytica used personal data from Facebook to create psychological profiles of voters and then targeted them with customized disinformation to help Trump win the 2016 election. These weren't just ads. They were curated illusions designed to sow division and to push people toward extreme ideologies and to erode trust in democratic institutions. That's not theory. That happened. And with Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and other tech executives who own and control media and communication across the US and the world at Trump's inauguration for his second term, we need to see this. and understand that they're collecting data on all of us and using that information to manipulate and control us. And with 60 Minutes buckling to pressure by Trump, we're witnessing the disillusion of objective investigative journalism and how even mainstream news outlets have sold themselves to corporate sponsors, and now their reports distort reality to fit political agendas, making it hard to tell where journalism ends and propaganda begins. Let's take another example, right? The deliberate and targeted disinformation spread about immigrants. Engineered false narratives portray them as job takers, criminals, murderers, rapists, gang members, and threats to national security. These stories aren't just shared by random users online. They're deliberately amplified by politicians and cable news programs and social media algorithms that reward sensationalism. Over time, these lies are accepted as quote-unquote truths that become the basis for harmful policies and justify brutal enforcement tactics. We've seen how this disinformation has led directly to ICE raids and deportations, even of people who've committed no crime at all. People who've lived in the United States for decades, who've built families here, paid taxes, contributed to their communities, have been ripped away in the middle of the night based on a story that immigrants are dangerous or don't belong. These narratives are used to stir up panic and to justify Trump sending National Guard troops to Los Angeles and Chicago, despite the fact that data shows immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are less likely to commit crimes than US-born citizens. And links to some of these reports will be in the episode description. But those facts don't trend, right? The lies do. Remember last year? It's really hard to believe that it's only been a year, but just last year, right before the presidential election, when rumors were spread online claiming that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were stealing and eating people's pets, it started as a series of unconfirmed and inflammatory social media posts that were then picked up by far-right influencers and commentators. And within days, there were Facebook groups and TikTok videos and YouTube clips racking up hundreds of thousands of views, all repeating variations of the same lie until Trump and Vance, during their campaign, proclaimed it as fact, leading to hysteria. And then people were sharing photos of random dogs, out-of-context videos, and doctored images as quote-unquote proof. And even after local police and the mayor of Springfield and the governor of Ohio discredited these reports as false, the rumor continued to spread, because by that point, it wasn't about the truth. It was about outrage. And the outrage worked exactly as intended. It generated clicks, views, ad revenue, and political capital. It gave right-wing commentators and influencers new content, and it gave Trump a talking point. The lie that Haitian immigrants were quote-unquote eating dogs in Ohio wasn't just misinformation, it was disinformation. It was engineered to provoke disgust and moral panic and to dehumanize an already vulnerable group of people. Because let's also not forget that Trump called Haiti a quote-unquote shithole country in 2018 during his first term. And we have to call out the blatant racism that Trump feeds into. He knows that many of his supporters are racist, but he doesn't care because he wants their votes and their money. He also doesn't care that disinformation about immigrants doesn't just distort public opinion, it endangers their lives. He wants that. He wants conflict and division, and he wants it to be a public spectacle. It creates the conditions for violence, for erasure, and for the expansion of his own political and personal power. So for Trump, it's good publicity that immigrants have been detained at hospitals and courthouses, that children have been separated from their parents, that families have been torn apart, not because of any actual threat they posed, but because a false narrative gave cover to dehumanizing enforcement practices. This is what happens when shadow puppets become policy. And when perception, not truth, shapes the way we treat human beings, it turns neighbor against neighbor by feeding fear, not facts. And that's what Trump and the other puppeteers want. In today's society, we're shaped by these shadow puppets from the moment we're born, through family, school, friends, social media platforms, and the entertainment that we watch. We become more and more exposed to other people who are shackled just like us, but who do the quote-unquote dirty work of the puppeteers. The politicians, the government leaders, media conglomerates, corporations, pundits, influencers, and whoever else there is with money and power pulling the strings behind the scenes that we don't even know about. But some puppeteers don't even try to hide it anymore. In fact, they gain celebrity and fortune from brazenly putting themselves out there as puppeteers. Trump himself has become a master in this sense when he says the most outrageous things and then leverages the outrage and spectacle for attention and control. And corporate-run media outlets are complicit by boosting his celebrity status because attention equals profit for them. The game now is that everyone is vying for our attention, not because they care about us, but because attention feeds the algorithm, and the longer their images and sound bites stay on our screens, the more influence and money they gain. The tragedy is that we all see different shadows, and that division keeps us fighting one another instead of looking for the source of the fire itself. And here's where this allegory takes a darker turn for our times. Some people choose to stay shackled, even after they've seen the puppeteers, even when they know the shadows aren't real. If you have ever seen The Matrix, what I'm talking about here is embodied in the character Cypher, who betrays Morpheus so that he can be plugged back into the Matrix because he feels reality is too harsh and that reality requires too much struggle. And there are many people in our society who feel this way. They accept the lies even when they know they're lies because the illusion feels safer, more familiar. They've become invested. They've been given just enough of a taste of agency to keep them hooked, to make them believe that they also can cast shadows. Every post, every like, every share becomes a small projection of self, a personal shadow on the wall. And when our posts get noticed, when they quote unquote go viral, it feels like we've ascended from prisoner to puppeteer. And that illusion of agency is intoxicating. And what complicates this even more is that we've become performative and reactionary by design. It's an addiction now. We crave the emotional dopamine hit that keeps us scrolling, even when we know it's harming us. And performative posting adds another layer to this digital cave we're all living in. And it becomes even more apparent when a crisis or tragedy unfolds online. I'm sure you've seen it. You've probably felt it. I know I have. It's when people post not to communicate something genuine, but to perform for their followers. Oh, look at me caring. Look at me outraged. Look at me on the right side of history. Now, this isn't to say that everyone who posts about a tragedy is being insincere. I mean, many people are genuinely heartbroken, of course, and scared, or trying to help. But we can't ignore that there are these social pressures and algorithm drivers that have turned public expression into performance. Because sometimes on these platforms, silence feels risky or uncomfortable. People feel like they have to say something, otherwise they might be judged or seen as apathetic or even out of touch. I know for myself, I've definitely worried about that. I've worried that if I didn't post or like a post that seemed on trend, that maybe people would judge me. And giving into that pressure, that's where the performance begins. Posts become less about the event itself and more about identity, about being seen, reacting in the quote unquote right way. And the incentive structures of the platforms reinforce this because the algorithm pushes posts that are easiest to share and that trigger strong emotions. But what's even more disturbing is that this performative feedback loop can actually become the dominant narrative of an event. The response itself becomes the story. The memes, the outrage, the quote unquote statements become the spectacle that overshadows the event itself, reshaping it in ways that distort truth, motive, and accountability. And for the people directly affected, the online aftermath can feel exploitative because their pain becomes content for others to perform empathy or anger around. And for society at large, this constant performance normalizes extreme framing. Everything becomes binary: victim or perpetrator, hero or villain, truth or lie. Conspiracy theories thrive because they fit perfectly into that polarized framing. And then from there, our shared knowledge pool evaporates and we lose a collective sense of what's real. And for us as individuals, the pressure to perform can be quietly devastating. The urgency to post, to be seen, to have something to say, feeds our anxiety. I've felt this. We mistake visibility for validation and conflate expression with action. And when we do that, we reinforce the very systems that thrive on our constant performance. Part of the problem, too, is that we've come to believe everyone must respond publicly to everything, that silence somehow equals complicity. But maybe the healthiest act of resistance right now is not to perform. Maybe it's to pause, to process, to think. Because silence, or at least a thoughtful pause, isn't apathy. It's awareness. It's the refusal to feed the machinery of spectacle. It's the decision not to participate in an ecosystem of harm. And this is where Plato's allegory comes full circle, because turning away from the shadows today doesn't mean physically walking out of a cave. It means mentally, emotionally, and spiritually choosing to become conscious. It means choosing to engage with difficult truths and to question not just what we see on our screens, but why we're seeing it and who profits when we do. It means recognizing the systems that benefit from keeping us divided, distracted, and in the dark. So I feel that's the challenge of our time. To look for the fire itself, not just the shadows on the wall. To break the chains of performance and illusion even when it hurts, even when it's uncomfortable. And to remember that freedom in the digital age might not look like posting at all. It might look like logging off. It might look like learning quietly, listening, reflecting. My friend told me recently that she was going to delete her Instagram account and renew her library card and just read. Because sometimes the most radical act isn't to speak louder. It's to step out of the cave into the light and to finally, consciously see. But seeing isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning. Because once you step out of the cave, once you see the machinery that shapes perception, profit, and belief, you have to decide what to do with that awareness. Do you go back in and try to free others, knowing they might resist you? Do you turn away from the fire altogether and build something new outside it? Or do you stand at the mouth of the cave, refusing to go back in, but also refusing to look away? That's the tension we live in now. We can't unsee what's been revealed. The manipulation, the spectacle, the way falsehood itself has become content. But we can choose how we respond. We can choose reflection over performance. We can choose open-mindedness over prejudice. We can choose compassion over outrage. Because the goal isn't to be seen caring. It's to actually care. Every time we pause before we post, every time we verify before we share, every time we refuse to reduce another human being into a prop for some moral theater, we chip away at the walls of the cave. We dim the fire of the algorithm that feeds the illusion. And maybe that's what it means to turn toward the light, not to escape the world, but to see it as it is and still choose to do good within it. To move through the noise and the chaos and the endless shadows and still hold on to something true. Because awareness without action, that's just another shadow. And consciousness, real consciousness, demands courage. The courage to stop performing. The courage to stop reacting. The courage to wake up. So yeah, maybe that's where we begin. Not with another post, but with a question. What would happen if we stopped performing for the digital cave and started living for the light of real life by valuing the people right in front of us and seeking experiences that promote human connection and dignity? That would be such a beautiful way for us to show up in the world. So this seems like a good place to end our discussion of this topic for right now. As I mentioned, Young and I will post links to articles about some of the issues that I brought up during this episode. But also, please feel free to Google anything that I referred to in my discussion. I encourage it. We should always be seeking to verify and to learn more. So as far as the next episode, I'm not really sure what I'm going to discuss. I might go back to talking about education, especially about the funding cuts for mental health support for students and perhaps even best practices for student-centered learning, or I may touch on something completely different. Because in addition to listening to Jon Stewart's podcast on YouTube, I've also been watching Trevor Noah and Hassan Minhaj, and a couple of recent episodes by each of them got me thinking about some other topics. So I don't know, we'll see what percolates in this head of mine. But Young and I will try to get another episode out before the end of the year, but if not, then we'll have something for the start of 2026. Either way, we hope you'll tune in for our next episode. And if you know anyone who you think would be interested in listening to this episode and to our podcast, Young and I hope that you will share our podcast with them. But before we close out, I'm going to talk about the Oracle card I pulled and share a message for personal development. So as a reminder, I do not claim to be a tarot card reader, and I don't do this with any kind of predictive intent or for divination or anything like that. I'm strictly using the Oracle cards as tools for personal development. So before I recorded this episode, I shuffled the Oracle cards, cut the deck, and just pulled the card on top. Oh, and I wanted to let you know, I'm using a different deck this time. The deck is called Woodland wardens. And each card features a different animal and plant. I decided to use this deck because I wanted artwork that was more grounded in nature. And the artist Jessica Rue, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, it's spelled Roux, says that the images and artwork are inspired by folklore and mythology about these animals and plants. So the card that I pulled is card number 1, the Cat and Lavender Independence. On the card, there's a picture of a black cat with a white mark or spot on its chest, and it's sitting up, looking very alert, and encircling the black cat are stems of lavender flowers. And at the bottom of the card is where it says, quote unquote, the cat and lavender. And under that, it says, quote unquote, independence. And while I've been talking throughout this recording, I've been looking at this card and reflecting on it. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that the cat is smiling. It has a very self-assured and confident air, but it also feels friendly. And I think that's important to point out because it's a black cat, and being so close to Halloween right now as I'm recording this, when I first pulled this card, I immediately drew associations to black cats linked to superstition and so forth. But after looking at it for a while now, I don't feel as though that's what this card is about. And I also want to go beyond the obvious ways that cats represent quote unquote independence. So what I get from this card as a message for personal development is, you are enough. I feel like somebody needs to hear those words. You are enough. Heck, I need to hear these words. I need to be saying this to myself. I am enough. Because we're not here to compete with anyone else. So we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others. I mean, talking about disinformation on social media, we could be seeing all of the ways that other people have it quote unquote good and feeling bad about ourselves. But that's an illusion, right? Those are shadows in the digital cave. We shouldn't allow that to make us feel inadequate. I am me, and I am enough. I'm walking my own path, and other people are walking theirs. And I have faith that my path will take me where I want to go, where I need to go. And I'm not going to cause harm to myself by comparing myself to others. I am the curator of my own life. I am enough, and you are enough too. So release worry and self-doubt and be self-assured, like this cat. And you know what just popped in my head? Be your own star player. And it's so funny that popped in my head because you know who said that, right? Cat Williams. That's the recurring punchline in one of his comedy specials. It's just so funny to me because there's a cat on this card looking like it's saying to itself, I am enough. And then suddenly Cat Williams popped into my head saying, be your own star player. So don't worry about everybody else. You should only worry about the motherfucker looking back at you in the mirror each day, right? Isn't that what Cat Williams says or something like that? But it's so true. You are enough, and you should say it to yourself. I am enough. So have confidence and rest when you need to. I mean, this cat looks wide awake, but we all know cats sleep a lot. Like my cat right now is snoring on her window ledge. So rest, unwind, take that time to decompress, to recharge, to release. And when you wake up, stretch back into the world assured that you are enough. Be your own star, even when no one's looking at you. Shine for yourself. I hope you found that message helpful and uplifting. We'll post an image of the card on Facebook and Instagram, on my personal Facebook and Instagram, as well as the Mind Your Margins Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much again for listening. Myung and I are so grateful to you for spending this time with us and sharing space. If you'd like to contact Myung and me, you can reach out to us via email at mindyourmargins@gmail.com and on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Myung and I also hope that you'll share the podcast and like and follow us on social media, as well as subscribe, so that you'll be notified when a new episode has posted. And just in case we don't release another episode before the end of the year, I want to wish you and your loved ones a very happy holiday season. Until we share space again, please be mindful of yourselves and mindful of others. Take good care.
I am who I am because it's been like Yun grandfather, one in a billion ancestor. I need to find my space, to find my face in this ancestral embrace that is skin tight, but my skin fits me just right. They're all there, my ancestral throne, for I am, we are, lifetimes infinite, billion strong.